Lord, I ain't ready to go. Can I live? Can I live? Dear Lord, can I live?
Alright, what's up, guys? This week I'm gonna switch it up. On May 25th, George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, right? And while most people understand how significant that is and how fed up the black community is, there are still others that do not. And I was talking to one of them, and I realized while talking to that person that it wasn't that they were racist. It was that they truly didn't understand what it means to grow up and be black and the adversities that we face. So, although some might disagree, right? People would say it's not our responsibility to inform and teach people these things because you have the internet, because you can go out and research for yourself. And I do agree with that, right? It's not our responsibility. But I also believe that if you're in a position where you can teach and hopefully change someone, you should definitely take the opportunity because it's not often that we get those chances, right? So this video is aimed towards teaching so that you can better understand. And when I say you, I definitely mean people not of color. This is not a black versus white thing. If anything, it's a black people of color versus racist thing, right? I watched a video the other day, and the Chief Master Sergeant was talking about how nervous and how his anxiety builds, right? Even as Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, the highest enlisted position you can have in the Air Force, right? When police get behind him. And I want to talk about the dynamics between black people and police, right? And in order to frame it, I have to give you a history lesson on how modern day policing towards black people, towards people of color came to be, right? In order to do that, we have to go back during slavery. And during slavery, they had people known as slave catchers, right? And slave catchers, what their job was to go and retrieve, at that time, property of people, slaves that had escaped. And in 1850, right, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. And what that did, right, because people were still doing it before, but slaves had more rights, right? So if they escaped and it was just he say, she say, when it went to court, a lot of people were still going free once they made it to the north. So Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And what that allowed the slave catchers to do, it gave them ultimate power. once it was passed, a slave catcher only had to say, hey, this slave escaped at this date. I believe that this is my slave. Or I believe that this is the slave of the person that I'm here on the behalf of. And a U.S. Marshal had to comply. And they had to let that person or persons catch or arrest the slave and take it back to the plantation. It also went as far as to say that anyone who interfered with this would be fined thousands of dollars, and they could incur prison time as well, right? So it really isolated the slaves. So you have the Fugitive Slave Act, you have the slave catchers. Then the 13th Amendment is passed in 1865, right? And this amendment abolishes slavery and servitude, involuntary servitude. But it says at the end, unless a person is convicted of a crime, right, and then imprisoned. So now you have a boost in policing, right? Because we cannot make these people slaves legally until we convict them of crimes, until we send them to jail, because in jail you are technically a slave of the state. So now you have an increase. So these slave catchers that were transition to the sheriffs and the policemen of the police departments. Follow me. Then you have Jim Crow laws after that, which target again black people. And by breaking these laws, you can then be sent to jail and be convicted and be a slave of the state. And the tool that they're using again, right, are police. Then you have a thing called redlining. And what redlining did was it boxed off areas that the state or the government did not deem worthy to invest in economically, right? Businesses, things of that nature. So in turn, you have areas now that people are facing economic crisis because in the neighborhoods that they live in, they are not getting invested in nearly as much as neighborhoods of their counterparts. But what this also did was it set up a box to target policing, right? So now you have a box that says, okay, this is a low income area and black people live here. So now we're going to send more police to this area because most people believe that low income means high crime, which is not true, right? And the only reason it seems true is because police these areas at a higher rate than they do other areas. So if you sit somewhere long enough, you're going to find something that you can take someone to jail on, right? And then you have the war on drugs. And the war on drugs is classic whistle blowing politics, right? And what that means is a politician says something to the general public. We're gonna fight. We're gonna declare a war on drugs, right? But in actuality, they mean something much, much deeper. And in this instance, the war on drugs was a war against crack cocaine. And crack cocaine was a drug that was used primarily by people of color, black people, African Americans. So the war on drugs was not truly a war on, it was a war on drugs, but it was targeting a specific community of people, specific community. And the legislation and the laws that were passed furthered that initiative, right? You could be caught with a gram of crack and be looking at 10 to 25 years, while your counterpart who does cocaine and they're caught with 10 grams, you have to have 10 to be looking at the same amount of time. And again, right, you have the police carrying out these objectives. And then we get to the present. So throughout time, since slavery was around until it ended and until now, we have been subject to police brutality by the very people in office, and by the police whose job is to protect and serve. But the protect and serve has an asterisk by it. And if you scroll all the way down to the page, you will see by the asterisk, it says, unless you are of color. This is the reality that we face. So now that you have the history on police and black relations, now we can fast forward to why it is we feel the way we feel when we are encountered by police. I'm a black man. Every black man that I know, I don't care how hard they are or how mentally sound they are. When we're driving and a police pulls behind us, or we even pass the police, our blood pressure rises. Our breath swiftens. Our body literally goes into fight or flight mode. Because throughout our lives and how we've grown up, the police have never been a source of peace. And there are people that say that, man, if they just follow directions and comply, and if they just be nice to the police and say, yes, sir, no, sir, that everything will be all right. But that's not the case. That's not the case at all. And I'll give you an example from when I was back home. I was driving from my aunt's house to my house, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I got pulled over by the police. And it was actually a state man. And got pulled over, and as soon as I pulled over, I reached in the glove compartment and I got out the insurance and the registration. Because if you're black, you do not reach for anything once the police comes to your window. because that would just give them another excuse to shoot you. So then the police officer comes to my window, and I roll it down. I say, "Good evening, sir." And immediately I am met with aggression, and I see the officer put his hand on his weapon. Why? My heart was already racing when the lights flashed. So it's double time now at this point. And the officer goes on to say, "Boy, what are you doing out this late?" Now, saying boy to a black man might as well be the equivalent of saying the N-word. It might as well. Yeah. And I explained to the officer that I'm going home. And the officer says, "All right, how about you just step out the car?" Yes, sir. And I step out the car and I'm getting patted down and I'm really thinking in my head, I'm about to die. Because his body language and the tone of his voice are not comforting at all. And this is the thing, guys. Police officers, they're already in a position of power, right? Everyone who goes to school or whatever know that when a police officer pull you over, they're the one in control of the situation, right? You just need to comply. But when officers abuse their power, it's something really wrong with them. It's something really wrong with them. Because to abuse your power when you're already in a position of power, to me, it screams insecure. It screams afraid. And it's sad because our skin has been weaponized to the point where if you gave me a script and you gave a white person a script and you told them, "Say this to the police officer," we would have two totally different outcomes. So after I got done getting patted down and then handcuffed and sat on the sidewalk, he finally asked me, "Where's your ID and your registration and all these things?" And mind you, I was driving my mother's car, and there were no warrants on the car, no unpaid fines, none of that. It's clean. So I gave it to him, and so when I grabbed the registration, I pulled out my driver's license, I pulled out my military ID, and then the registration and the insurance. Put it on the dashboard. It says on the dashboard. He goes to the dashboard, he sees the ID, guys, and this man's entire character switched. The aggression evaporated into thin air. And no longer was I a boy. I was my name. And I was now a friend. because his father was in the military too. Now, obviously, that little ID, that little military ID, saved me from who knows what. But there's so many people who don't have that get out of jail free card. Right? This is not a video that's up for debate. It's not, because we're just getting killed disproportionately. So nothing is up for debate. This is not a video for you to comment and try to minimize our struggles, because you will never know them. This is a video for you to listen and to try to understand how I can feel safer in a foreign country with foreign police that speak not very good English, that have more power legally than police back in the States than I do in my own home, in my own state. It's a problem. And the only thing we want is the equality that is advertised to the world. That's it. We don't want revenge. We don't want any of those things. We just want the equality. Good old-fashioned equality. So you have to choose now. Are you going to help or not? And not making a decision is definitely making a decision that is not in our favor at all. 400 plus years we've been policed in some manner, targeted in some manner. Have you?
Can I live? Can I live?